your Son. Father, here I am undone before my lover. Father, Savior, Spirit, three in one. He loves us, how he loves us, how he loves us so. How he loves us so. Oh, he is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. All of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory. Realize just how wonderful you are and how great your affections are for me. Realize just how near you are. Every time I come to you, run to you, you're right there, right there. Because he is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane, I am a tree bending.
Hey everyone, welcome to our latest installment of Wednesday Night Live. We have been learning about the forgotten virtues, and today is all about integrity. We are so excited to welcome our special guest, Ian Byrd. Ian is with us. For those of you that don't know, Ian is the apostolic team leader of Lifelinks and is also the pastor of Forerunner Church in Calgary. And I've also got here, Ian is a huge Rough Riders fan. Is that true, Ian? The best team in the league, according to Ian Byrd. I have that down in writing.
You say that at the front end of a talk on integrity.
As start as I mean to go on, Ian. No, we're so glad to have Ian with us and have his wisdom shared. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave. We are still going to have our Q&A session. So if you have any questions as we're going, we'll find a time when we'll do quick fire Q&A where people have about 20 seconds to answer. So please do send your questions in as the night goes on, and we will try and get those into at that time. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
All right. Thanks, Jen. I really like that shot with Ian because he really is a learning Rough Rider fan. And so it's good to have him on the show just to kind of, put that nail in a little bit deeper. But anyhow, tonight we're going to talk about integrity. We looked at, over the last couple of weeks, we looked at honor, we looked at loyalty as being virtues that were once strong in our society, and we probably lost a step in some of these virtues. And integrity, of course, is another one that's so important. So, how important is integrity, in a person's life? I mean, is that a small issue, big issue? How big an issue is it?
I think it's a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would argue that maybe there is no bigger issue in a person's life than their integrity.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's huge in life, society, work, family. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is big, and I think it's probably, if you ask people, what's the thing that, especially say in a leader, for example, what's the one quality that would be above all others, I think you would find that integrity would probably come up more often than any other quality, because it is so vital. And I think as we go through tonight, we'll see that, and we're not going to be able to finish this topic tonight. We're going to do it again next week because it's such a big area and there's so much to it. So, can you share a story of integrity that's personal to you or happened to you? Any of this panel here, do you have a story you could tell us tonight?
I could jump in.
Sure.
I was thinking about this. I think one of the biggest times where I had to deal with integrity was when I was in business, and a period of time where I ran a couple of businesses in the mid-90s, and one of them was a magazine business, and I was selling advertising. And I had an organization that the people I bought the franchise from, they were into lying. Like their whole sales technique when they came down to train you was exaggerate numbers, tell bigger, your viewer, how many people are going to read it and all that stuff. And then the other thing was just not being honest. So I just had to decide, no, I'm going to be honest about the numbers of magazines. I'm not going to inflate numbers. And I remember one time I was selling advertising with doing a contra deal with a limousine group. We were giving away a prize, and so I said, I'd like a paper trail on this. I'd like you to give me an invoice, and we need to do this right. And he says, no, I don't need to do that. And I said, well, I do. I have someone else that's watching over my business, and I insisted on it. And so he gave me an invoice. But I just learned through that. That was a big season for me. Lots of tests in business. Was I going to cut corners? What was I going to do? So I remember that.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Ian. That's good. Joel, you have a story?
Well, I do. One time I was in Banff. Actually, the very first time I was ever in Banff. I was there with Angela and a friend. We had driven up from Calgary, and we were touring the Banff. Is it the Banff Springs Hotel, the expensive one there? And in the lobby, we found a wallet that literally had over $3,000 in the wallet, in cash, in the wallet. And so we had this decision, what are we going to do with this? And we turned it into the front desk. So
Wow.
I hope the front desk had integrity.
Right.
If not, I should have kept that.
Shucks.
Maybe the Lord was providing and I failed to see it.
Missed a chance.
So that's my big moment of
Oh,
integrity.
that's pretty good. $3,000 in a wallet.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a lot of
Wow,
cash.
that's
It
a
was a
lot.
fat wallet.
Wow.
You know, I read a book several years ago, actually, and I don't know, it's an old book now, maybe in the 90s, maybe in the 2000s, I'm not sure, but it was a book called The Day America Told the Truth. And it was a book about, in the book they did a survey. They actually, surveyed, it was written in the U.S., so there's U.S. stats, but those stats I think would apply to Canada as well as the United States. And some of the stats in there were shocking. And for example, I'll just give you a couple of things. But they said, 13% of all Americans see all the 10 Commandments as binding on us today. Only 13%. It said that they found out that 91% lie regularly at home and at work. They found out that when they asked the question, who do you lie to? 86% said to parents, 75% said to their friends. And most of the workers admitted to goofing off at least 7 hours a week on their job. Half the people that responded said that they regularly called in sick when they were perfectly well. And this is regularly calling in sick. And then one of the questions they asked, they posed a question to these people: what would you be willing to do for $10 million? And here's what the 25% said: they would abandon their families for $10 million. 23% said they would become a prostitute for a week for $10 million. And 7% said they would kill a stranger for $10 million. So out of 100 people, 7 people would be willing to kill you if the price was right.
Wow.
And so when you look at those stats,
Swearing
you
in.
think, whoa. So that book was called The Day America Told the Truth, right? So it was kind of scary. It just kind of showed you, it was a bit of a shock to show you where people's values actually lie in the area of integrity. I have a question for you. Is integrity higher among men or among women? What do you think? There you go, Jen.
I would say evenly balanced. I'm not sure I want to go into that argument.
Do you think it's 50-50?
I think there's probably areas that women would tend to have more integrity in and areas that men would tend to have more integrity in. I think there's probably some, that would be my non-committal, sitting on the middle of the fence answer.
Okay. What do you guys think? They think men or women have more integrity? Who would behave more ethically?
I would tend to agree with Jenny. I don't know that there'd be a difference just on gender. I think they're both equally either integral or not. So that would be my opinion as well. I know Joel might think differently.
What do you think, Joel?
I think probably more men would lie about their golf score and more women would lie about their weight.
Well, funnily enough, Ron is commenting here, I can vouch for Joel, he has integrity even on the golf course. So there you go. Not you, you're the one that stands above the rest.
Actually, you guys are all wrong.
Oh.
Women are actually behave more ethically than men. And in fact, less than half as many women as men believe that the only way to get ahead is to cheat.
Wow.
Women are much less willing to compromise their values to get ahead. And they are much more willing to quit on the matter of principle. If they were, for example, in a situation where they had to compromise their integrity to quit, to keep their job or something like that, women are much more willing to quit that job than men would be. In fact, if valuable property is stolen, 6 times out of 7, it will be a man rather than a woman as a thief. So, sorry, you guys, you're all wrong. Actually, women tend to be more ethical than men, in many areas. Now, when you start talking about weight, well, that's maybe that might be a little different. But in most cases, surveys have shown that actually, women are actually more ethical. So
Not surprised.
Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised.
My wife's watching,
I'm not surprised either.
my wife was watching, so she told me to put that question in there. So
Should've known.
what are people's attitudes towards leadership these days? Like, I'm talking about people in government, just people in leadership in general. What are people's attitude towards leaders these days?
I would think you can't trust. I know I hear all the time, you can't trust any politician.
Right.
There's so much lack of integrity in
Right.
politics and leadership, and yeah, people going back on their word, and
Right.
so.
Okay. Do you think there's a general? Do you think it's just politicians, or do you think there's a, there's a lack of trust, in leadership and various levels? What do you
Well,
think?
if you look at it, I mean, I just think about even spiritual leaders, clergy. If you think back, my dad was a pastor. So, back in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot higher regard for him. And clergy meant something, and people would give kind of deference. And today, being clergy or being a minister, that's not as respected. We know that, right? There's a less, in fact, in some ways it's looked down on because of scandals and things that have happened. So that's definitely an example to me of the cynicism.
Right. You're talking about society, Ian, as far as how they would look at even leaders in the church, for example.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's true. In fact, even just a week or so ago, another prominent Christian leader went down morally in the U.S. And so you just see that, all too common. When you see elections today, what's the focus when you see elections run off? What happens in those elections? I mean, what's the focus of many people who are running for office? What is their focus?
Well, you're trying to make the other guy look like he's not trustworthy.
It's like mudslinging.
Yeah, mudslinging.
Dig
In
up
fact,
dirt, yeah.
it's less about policies these days. It's
Yeah.
more like attack ads and how I can discredit the person I'm running against. And sometimes you look at elections, you say, what are these guys actually standing for? What are they running for? And you don't even know. It's not even an issue.
No.
It's not even reported anymore, right? So it just kind of shows you what's happening. What was it like, you think, you guys are pretty young, but Ian's a little bit older. What do you think it was like in terms of integrity 30, 40 years ago? What would it be like back then? Do you think it was better?
I've got very little reference for
Were you even alive?
You weren't even alive.
no, but
What do you think, Ian? You're kind of a little bit.
Yeah, I'm in that range. Definitely can remember. It definitely was different. It was more of the days of, your word is your bond kind of thing. Like there was more of that kind of attitude back then, where people were more trusting and more trustworthy in some ways. I think it's definitely changed. You look at the amount of litigation, you look at the amount of, contracts needed, and like it's massive now. The protection you need against what others might take advantage of. So I would definitely think it's changed over the last 30, 40 years. Would you agree, Dave?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid that what you said, like, a man's word being his bond. I just remember, like, in my father's generation, for example, if they committed to something, it was like they signed on a dotted line. If you made an agreement and it was based on a handshake. In fact, I remember as a kid hearing, if you broke your word, it was something it was like shocking to the community. If you promised something and you didn't fulfill it, that was a really bad situation for your reputation in the community. That people's integrity was critical, and it was of a high regard. I remember, I remember when people didn't lock their doors. You left your keys in the car.
yeah, Ron said the exact same thing. Growing up, our front door was never locked and the keys were always left in the ignition. Gary says integrity was a lot more prevalent in years past.
In fact, in my parents' house, we didn't even have a lock on the door.
Yeah.
So we could go away for a month's vacation. We wouldn't lock the door. Never locked the door. Never had a key to our house because we didn't have a lock.
Yeah.
And you'd never lock your car. And most of the time you could walk down the street and you see everybody's keys in the ignition. And so even Joel, when we were living in Swan River, which was a little over 30 years ago, farmers back then, we never locked our house. We never locked our house where we lived. Farmers, and they left their keys in the ignition of their tractors and their cars because they didn't want to lose their keys. And so even 30 years ago, that was the way it was. I don't know if that'd be true of, say, the city, but it certainly was in rural areas. So yeah, we definitely have lost a step in that whole area.
Yeah, Tracy says we have passwords and locks on everything now, which is true.
Right. You know, Mark Twain, you've heard of him. Have you heard of him, Jenny?
Yeah.
Mark Twain is a comedian. He said this. He said, always do right. It will gratify some people and astonish the rest. And so, I mean, he was a humorist, but it's true. Always do right. It will gratify some people, astonish the rest. Because we live in a world where we're almost more shocked by integrity than a lack of integrity.
True.
And it's tragic when we live in a society which is shocked about when people do the right thing, because it's so rare versus doing the wrong thing. And so what happened? What happened to us? Why do you think that there's been such a downward slide? Any ideas?
Well, I just want to throw in there that I think it honestly relates to the shift away from biblical values. When I was younger too, when I was a kid, we definitely thought more of what the Bible said, the Ten Commandments. These were all part. I remember praying the Lord's Prayer every morning at school. This was just part of kind of life, and I think as we move that away, our moral code has decayed as well. That would be my initial thought.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I would totally agree with you. And I remember too, as a kid in school, where the Bible sat in the teacher's desk, and we said the Lord's Prayer every day, and it definitely was, and those values were there. Didn't mean that everybody was a Christian, but everybody believed in many of those values and respected them. And say it's long gone now. So Jenny, I know you have this in definition. You're burning to tell us, what is the definition of integrity?
Well, as Google defines it, Dave, is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles or moral uprightness.
All
It
right.
also says the state of being whole and undivided, which I thought was interesting. It was more of it had the link of like a territorial integrity of a structure, but I think it's quite telling to be whole and undivided as a characteristic too that feeds into integrity.
Okay. Anything you guys want to add anything to that?
I was, the definition of, I've heard the definition of character being that, who you are when nobody is looking, but I think I think it implies just as well for integrity.
Yeah.
Do you do the right thing even when nobody's around you or seeing you do the right thing? To me, that's a real test of your integrity.
Right. So what would be, go ahead, Ian.
Well, I was just going to add one more thought to it, which it's a different term, but I would again is sincerity and being sincere. And I like the meaning, which is without wax. The origin of it is without wax, and it's the vase that they used to sell, in the Greco-Roman times, where they would put the wax in the cracks, so you would look at the vase and think it was amazing, but then when you look closely, you would see that actually the cracks were filled in with wax. So it was flawed, but it was being deceptive. And I think integrity is where you're willing to let the cracks be shown, right? Like who you are is what people see. That would be another thought I'd add in.
Yeah.
So what would it look like in terms of behavior? What would it look like in life? What do you expect if a person, you see a person of integrity, what kind of behavioral characteristics would you see from a person of integrity?
Honesty.
Honesty, tell you the truth,
Tell you the
don't lie,
Okay.
faithful.
Right? Okay. All right. Anything else?
I think that kind of that what you see is what you get, in the sense that there's not a facade. You are really, David said, I will put before my eyes no vile thing in my home, kind of thing. Like my life in my home is the same as my life outside, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I wrote down, paying your debts, keeping your promises,
Yeah.
facing up to your weaknesses, being real. Yeah. Jenny, what's the difference between integrity and reputation?
Well, the definition of reputation is beliefs or opinions that are generally held about someone or something. So I guess your reputation is opinions, but your integrity, your actions would
Okay.
be my take on what the difference would be.
Okay. Anything to add on that, you guys?
I was thinking of two examples of people who at one point had a super reputation, great reputations, and now their integrity is totally in tatters. One is Bill Cosby, the comedian, right? At one point, he was like the apple pie, he's the comedian for the whole family. Well, today we know that his reputation did not match his integrity. And the other one is Bill Hybels, the Christian leader, right? Who had great reputation, but now his integrity has destroyed that. So the integrity trumps reputation every time. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, I always felt like reputation is who people think you are, but integrity is who you really are.
Yeah,
Who you really are.
And sometimes those two things don't match.
Yeah.
And so it can be a little scary sometimes. So what's the opposite of integrity?
Deceit, I would guess.
Okay, yeah.
Dishonesty.
Deceit, lying.
Yeah.
So why do people lie?
That's a good
Oh, there's
question.
probably lots of reasons why people lie. But a lot of times it's to make yourself look good, to cover up
Insecurities, maybe.
insecurity, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think fear is a big motivator, right? If if you have nothing to be afraid of, you're not going to lie. But if you're afraid of false, who you are coming out, you're going to lie, or even a lack of fear of God. If I don't have true principle, so.
Yeah, what do you think the root cause? What do you think the root cause of lying is?
Well, I mean, I think our sin nature. Do you want to go that? You
Yeah.
want to go that deep?
Yeah, I think it's
I think
exact-
we're born with a sin nature,
Yeah, so we're born liars, right?
right? Satan is described as the father of lies,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So unless you have a life surrendered to Jesus, that's what's driving your whole life is your sin nature and the enemy of our souls.
Right.
I have a comment from Harvest City Church saying lying is often a result of pride. Pride can be.
Yeah,
the
that's
root of
true.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's we're born liars. You don't have to teach anybody to lie.
Yeah.
How long does it take for a little kid to start practicing deceit? Not long.
Yeah. When there's food involved, not long at all.
Well, let's get into something here. You we were talking before we went on air here about some of the things like the arrogance of integrity, and we were all kind of looking at that kind of thing.
We just lost power, but I think we're still.
Are we still on?
The program feed is down. Camera 5's out because it's powered. Okay, so can we go to the other one? We're still live.
We're having a few technical difficulties if we're still with you.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
Tell the group, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe just be our voices for a little bit.
Okay. For this, I know where it is. Okay, I noticed they were doing stuff in the other room.
So we're still live, so people can still hear us, correct? So, one of the
Yeah.
one of
Images
the
up.
things that, of course, again, this happened in the 80s, so it was quite a while ago. But there was a lot of scandal in the 80s in the body of Christ, and one of the scandals involved a large Christian TV network called PTL, and Jim Baker was a part of that. And Ian, you'd remember that. And,
I do.
And so there was a lot of scandal to do with it. And PTL became more than just a television network. They actually built a whole community, and they built all these buildings, and it involved millions and millions of dollars. And then there was moral issues in there, and then there was financial issues. Well, there was a guy named Richard Dortch, who was actually the president of PTL. It wasn't Jim Baker. It was a guy named Richard Dortch. And he was one of the guys that they investigated, and he was actually charged with fraud and with conspiracy, and he went to prison. And he went to prison. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but it was, with good behavior, he got down to 2.5 years. And eventually he got back into ministry, and he wrote a book, and the book was called Integrity: How I Lost It and My Journey Back.
Wow.
And Did you ever read that book, Ian?
I have not read that book.
So
No.
I bought the book. I don't know if I have it anymore. But in his book, he talked about integrity because he realized that one of the things he had given up was he had given up his integrity. And so he talked about the different kinds of integrity. And so he talked about 3 different kinds. Actually, he talked about more than that, but I pulled out 3. And one of the things he talked about was called the arrogance of integrity. And I know, Jen, you tried to find that on Google and could not find
Yeah,
it.
it's not on there, guys.
So I'm just going to ask you to use your brains for a minute tonight. What do you think he meant by the arrogance of integrity?
I'll take a shot.
Take a shot.
Take one for the team, Joel.
Ooh, let there be light.
Yeah,
Here
it
we
sounds
go.
like it's going to be a great answer. Oh.
Yeah, illuminate us.
Yeah. No pressure.
I think this is what I would think the arrogance of integrity. I've never heard of this phrase before. So I'm
Dave
guessing
made it
it is that you get cocky with you never think that you overestimate just the capability within you for evil.
Right.
And you think I'm known as a person of integrity. I'm always going to have integrity. This is sort of my reputation. And it kind of puffs you, and it's kind of like pride comes before a fall sort of idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. Good, Joel.
Yes.
And yeah, I think what happens is you start believing your own press,
Yeah.
and you become arrogant actually, and the arrogance of integrity is blind. Actually, you start believing it. When you start believing your own press,
Yeah.
then it's deception actually, and then you start thinking of yourself after a while as an exception. And I think that's why we'll have leaders that will fall because they somehow get to think, well, I'm an exception, and I can pick and choose when and how I'm going to sin. And they convince themselves, God is a forgiving God, and He'll just overlook this part of this thing in my life, and it's not that big a deal. And honestly, I don't know how you feel about Joel and Ian, but sometimes people will actually have said to me, or they've said publicly about me, Dave's a man of integrity. And can I tell you that when I hear that, it makes me squirm a little bit inside because it scares me, and because I'm thinking, you know what? I don't think I'm quite that man of integrity that you think I am. I think that there's an example where sometimes your reputation. That might be your reputation, but I'm thinking, you know what? I just don't think I'm as good as my reputation, and that's the way I start thinking about it. And so, actually, makes me a little squirmy. I'd just rather say, I'm a flawed person,
Right.
I'm a flawed leader, and I have problems like everybody else, and I'd rather be there than putting up on any kind of a pedestal or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so
I
that's-
really, I was going to just chime in. I really like a quote from David in the Bible when he marvels at how God has treated him, and he basically says that he's amazed at the goodness of God. He says, "You treat me like I am someone who you know what I'm really like." That's what David said to God, and I've often read that and thought about it because there's a humility in that, because David realizes. Everyone thinks I'm this great person, this great leader, and God, that's because of you. You lifted me up, but God, you know who I really am. And almost like David saying, I need to remember who I really am.
right.
And so I'll often pray that actually. It's part of a series of things that I'll pray, but I'll just remind myself that God, you lift me up, you put me in positions, but you know who I really am. And as long as I know who I really am, my flaws, and grace covers that. So I think that's a good point about the arrogance. Thank you for unpacking that, Joel, because I couldn't Google and find it either. So.
Well, I think that you brought up David, Ian, and I think that David fell to that. I mean, he was a man of integrity, but I think he became arrogant about it, and of course we know what happened. With the whole issue with Bathsheba, I think he fell prey. He fell prey to that, and he just started. The crowds were, he had such great press, and everybody idolized him that he got puffed and down he went. So scary. Another term that Dortch wrote in his book. He talked about something called judgmental integrity. What do you think that is?
I'll try and take one. It's probably not going to be as good as Joel's answer. I guess what I thought when I saw that was when, I don't know if it links into the arrogance of integrity, almost where because you feel like you're better than someone else, you then try and call out things in other people. So I'm really honest, so I'm going to call out all of the times that you're lying, or I keep my promises, so I'm going to call out and be judgmental when someone else doesn't keep theirs. It would be what I would think of when I would read that term.
Yeah, I think that's really right on, Jenny. That's a good answer. So here's one you got without going to Google,
I
right?
know, we're killing it tonight,
So
Joel.
Smarter than you think.
You're smarter than you think, yeah.
It's probably not saying much, but
I'm
I'll take
impressed with you
it.
guys.
Smarter than I thought you were.
It's
I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's
Just being
integrous.
Appreciate your integrity.
Yeah.
People become judgmental because they start calling out exactly what you said, Jenny.
Yeah.
They start calling out, weaknesses in other people. And can you think of any examples? You ever see anybody do that? I mean, where they're actually, they just become very judgmental in this area, and they're picking out weaknesses and criticizing others. But what's really interesting is they're doing it themselves.
Yeah.
They're judging it in other people, but they're actually doing the same thing with themselves. In fact, I've seen people that they're trying to cover up their own weakness and their own failures by judging everybody else and focusing the attention out there.
Look outward, not inward.
And it's not focused on me. And I remember one time several years ago in the early 80s, actually, there was a very famous world evangelist. And I remember I was listening to him on the radio. I listened to his preaching. And he was a great preacher. And very talented, gifted guy, could sing, put out records, great preacher, did evangelistic crusades, had a huge following, big TV ministry. And so I was listening on the radio one night, and he was just going after the whole issue of immorality and sin and actually calling out people and naming people. And as I started listening to him, I just started cringing inside and thinking, whoa, I think you're really on dangerous ground here. And it wasn't that much longer after that actually he was all exposed. He had major moral issues and had moral issues in his life for years. And finally, he blew up, and it all came out. And so there was an example of judgmental integrity where he was coming across as righteous and calling all these sins out, but actually he was engaged in them himself. And so there would be an example of that.
I have a question that's come to my mind, and this is a good reminder. If you have any questions, please do send them in. When you're talking about like the moral failures, what always comes to mind, and I feel like maybe this is part of it, is it's often the connotation is it's like adultery would be the first thing. There's a moral failure as adultery. So do you think that when it's not that moral issue, so people are like, well, I'm faithful in my marriage, so it's easy to call out all these other things. But actually, when we're talking about moral principles, that's just one.
Right.
And there are many others. And so people almost think, well, this is the label that's if you have a moral failure. So as long as I'm doing well in that area,
Right.
but these other things are easier to creep up on because they don't seem as, I have got this one figured out, but these things come out of nowhere. And so like being a moral upright person is many things,
Right.
but it's maybe overshadowed. I don't know if that would be part of the reason why people might go into this judgmental integrity.
Yeah, I think we always tend to think we're better than we are, right? So it's kind of like when you ask somebody, do you think you're going to go to heaven when you die? Everybody tells you yes because of how awesome they are, right? So we always see that person as horrible. Or, we look with disgust at somebody else, but fail to see it in what we're doing as being as bad as that. So we think,
Yeah, that would be judgmental integrity. In fact, the Pharisees, for example, were really bad for that, right? Jesus called them hypocrites.
Whitewashed tombs.
Whitewashed tombs, like full of dead man's bones, but white on the outside.
Yeah.
That's judgmental integrity, right? They came across as this righteous, holy people, but they were far from it.
Yeah.
And they had no problem calling it out in everybody else.
One thing, Dave,
Go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, Dave, like just with what Jenny was saying about that one area versus others. I know one thing you and I've had many chats over the years, and especially for us as male leaders, you've always said the three things are the three areas are women, power, and money.
Right.
The three areas that'll for especially for a man, right? Those relationships, and so it's not just committing adultery, money, power.
Right.
These are all things that can corrupt us. So I think if we just focus on one thing, Jenny, we're vulnerable in so many areas if we let our guard down.
It's true.
And then there's something that he brought out in his book called consensual integrity. Any ideas on that?
I think Ian
I'll
needs to
give
take
it a
this
shot.
one.
It's Ian's turn.
Yeah.
These guys are 2 for 2. So I'm going to put on the line. I might fail here, but the best shot I have is that would be where 2 people agree about what integrity is. It's their own level of integrity. And so they say this is an acceptable level of integrity or morality. We agree that this is good enough. This is what we adhere to, and they live that way because they've agreed. But it's actually not integrity. They're actually violating principles.
Yeah, that's true, Ian. That's good.
Good for you, Ian.
Wow, best for
Well,
last.
we're batting 3 out of 3. You guys are brilliant. But we can get into it where we'll just accept it. We'll settle for a certain level of integrity, though in our own hearts we know it's wrong. And what can cause us to be like that? What can cause us to fall into that? In fact, you'll see consensual integrity almost at every level of life. You'll see it all. You'll see it in the workplace. You can see it in society. It's an area where people can fall into very, very easily. Why is it that we'll just kind of, it's seeing something that's wrong and you don't do anything about it. You just kind of accept it. This is the way it is. We don't want to, that's the status quo.
Yeah. Maybe it's the easier road to take. It's easier to just agree to this, what seems to be the consensual integrity in a workplace, in a home, in a friendship. And that's easier than actually standing on a different moral principle.
Right.
Yeah, you can stand out. I can tell you that I'm thinking back to even when I was in my early 20s, and in this church youth group, young adults, and just at that time I remember being in a movie theater and knowing that with a whole bunch of young adults from our church at the time, and sitting against the wall of the theater. So to get out, I had to walk by everybody, and yet knowing that what was on the screen, I was not comfortable with it. That I had made these decisions with the Lord that I wasn't going to watch these kinds of things. And so here I was in it, and remember thinking, if I walk out of this room, I'm going to walk by everybody, and they're all going to think, oh, he thinks he's better than us, or he's making a big deal out of nothing. Like I had all these sort of thoughts going through my brain, and I was wrestling with myself. And finally I went, I got to do what I promised the Lord I would do, and walked out that night. But I think that was an example. I felt like everybody is kind of going, this is the standard, this is okay. But I knew that the Lord had asked me to live at a different standard. Now I don't want to give the impression that I'm this. That I just do all these righteous things all the time.
Yeah, because otherwise we'll be calling you have the arrogance.
Holy Jolie. Tracy's already texting Holy Jolie. I know it's not true.
We do have some great comments. May said consensual integrity equals everyone does it. Gary said peer pressure can lead to consensual integrity. Nicole says, I think there can be a fear of standing up for what is correct when certain things are on the line.
Right. Yeah, no, I think consensual integrity is actually something that is way more common than we want to believe.
Yeah.
That we actually settle for a lot of things that we shouldn't settle for. And we don't want to pay the price of actually blowing the whistle on it ourselves.
Well, you'll find sometimes in the workplace, I've heard of people who are doing the right thing and they're walking in integrity, and actually their fellow workers get angry because they're showing them up.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
They're breaking the agreed upon performance level. So
Yeah, for sure.
No, that's true.
You know, why is integrity, like if you did a survey of people and you said, you know, what is the number one quality that you want to see in a leader? And most often you'll get integrity being the number one quality that people want to see in a leader. Why is it the number one quality? I mean, there's many values and many qualities that we could talk about, but why is integrity number one? Why do people say that? Why not love? Why not some other quality? Why integrity? Why is that number one?
I think because you can't.
I'll chime in on it real quick. I think because people want safety from their leaders. I think ultimately when someone leads us, we want to feel safe, we want to feel cared for, we want to feel covered, whatever level that is. And I think integrity gives us that feeling of safety. If there's not integrity, then we don't have confidence in that. That would be my thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess I would think that we know that no one is infallible, and so if you have someone with integrity, I think it breeds trust. Like, you can trust someone with integrity because if you're honest, then you're going to be honest, like what Ian said earlier, honest about your flaws, that you're not just going to try and cover them, you're going to show the real you. And so you can trust people who show the real them, and you know that no one's perfect. Whereas when people put this picture forward of being perfect, you kind of can't trust it because no one is. So,
Right.
yeah.
I think you asked the question, why would we value integrity over other qualities like love, or what was the other one you said?
Well, I didn't. I just said love would be one of
okay.
them, but there's, you know,
Sure.
maybe honor, you know, gratitude.
I'm kind of thinking that it's sort of the foundation that all those other ones are built on.
Yeah.
So how do I know that you really love me if you haven't shown integrity in other areas? Maybe it's an act. Maybe it's not true.
Right.
Right? So,
Okay.
so I feel like it, in some ways, the others build upon
Right.
it.
Okay. Let me throw an observation, and it kind of points this to why I think it's also the number. I mean, what you're saying is good. I think there's even a bit more to it. And you know, one of the things that I observed is that when, for example, a leader has an integrity failure, a moral failure or something like that, or a lack of integrity, the people who are following that leader get very angry. And I've seen it. I mean, I saw it when Linda and I moved to Regina and took over this church, and it was taking over a church where the former leaders had failed in integrity on several levels, and the amount of anger
Yeah.
that was in people was amazing. I mean, it was scary, actually, in many ways. I mean, by the grace of God, they were great people, and they had to come to terms with it, and they dealt with it. But it was an eye-opener for me. I'd never seen it I'd never seen that. And I've seen it, you know, in working in other churches and working with other situations where I've seen leaders fail in the area of integrity. I've seen the anger that can be in people who have been following that leader. Why the anger? Why is that? And whereas if there was a lack in some other way, in some other area, like say somebody wasn't as loving as they should have been, or maybe they failed in some other virtue, you don't see that anger, that rage that can rise up. So why does a lack of integrity bring that kind of response? What do you think?
I would say when I've personally had that response, for me, the anger was almost bred out of humiliation for myself in that I trusted that person. Like, almost like, I feel like an idiot now for believing you. So sometimes I think it maybe is kind of inward too, in that I now feel like a fool for trusting in you and believing that you had integrity when this was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, you're right on, Jenny, and I think you're really touching on the real reason, because it actually is a reflection on your integrity.
Yeah.
Because if you're following a leader who has integrity and that leader fails,
Yeah.
then you feel like a fool, because you feel like, now I feel like I have lost my integrity, because people who would look at that leader
Yeah.
would say that person's lost their integrity, then they would look at you and
And
say,
you
well,
followed
you're not
them.
a person of integrity either, because you followed that
That's a
leader.
good point.
You
Yeah.
followed that issue, so it becomes very personal. So if a leader falls with has an integrity failure, it becomes very personal to the people following, because now they are painted with the same brush. And I remember, you know, when I first came to Regina, people because of the failure that we had in our church, and the whole community knew it, and the whole city knew it, and half the country knew it seemed, you almost felt like, well, what church you go to? And you didn't even want to tell them. Say, well, you kind of mumble it out of the corner of your mouth, well, I go to that church. People were ashamed to even say, I go to this church. And a lot of people, of course, left the church because they didn't want to be a part of it anymore, and didn't want to be painted with that. But praise God, there was that faithful core that hung in there. But they had to bear the reproach and say, well, yeah, it's not only that leader that lacks integrity, that church lacks integrity. You belong to that church. And so that's why it becomes very personal at that point. And that's why it really touches the nerve, and you'll see that response.
I think that aspect of broken trust, Dave, trust is given, right? It's earned and it's also given. When we lead people, they trust us. They give their trust to us. I think it's a terrible violation when we break that trust, when we prove untrustworthy, when they've given us a commodity, because really trust is an amazing commodity. We can lose it quite quickly with people, break trust, and to rebuild it is really, really difficult. And so I think I think of that often as a leader, how much these people trust me, how much they that they're willing to follow what I'm saying and doing. And that's actually a huge gift. They've given me something quite precious. So I think that's part of it too, because if I've given trust to somebody and they've broken trust and they violated my trust, I think that's very offensive. So.
Yeah, I mean, you think of people, you think about your family. If you break trust in a moral, and break your integrity, how devastating it is to your family members, your children if you have children, those who are your closest friends. That it's huge. It's something that, I mean, I've seen that kind of failure a number of times, and every time I see it, and I see the consequences of it, it just scares the daylights out of me as a leader, and it just, you just feel like, Lord, can I just get to the finish line without blowing up?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So,
we have some comments here. Twyla said, you feel like you've been played for a sucker. Sharon says, when trust is broken, it's hard to get it back. Echoing what you said. Jenny says, trust broken is being hurt and can turn into bitterness or anger. Tracy says, when leaders are set in, they take a vow to the Lord and the congregation, which would also bring that anger also. Yes.
I think there's, trust and intimacy, of course, are totally related. And so you have to be vulnerable, right? And so when I trust you, in a sense, I'm making myself vulnerable. I'm tearing down the walls, and I'm allowing you to get near me, close to me. And so when you violate me, or when you don't have integrity towards me, you violate me right to the core. Because I allowed you a special space inside of me, right? I think that's why it makes me so angry. I let you in, right? And I trusted you, and I got vulnerable with you, and you didn't honor that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Any questions that people
We do,
have?
we have some great questions, and if you're hearing this now and you have one, please put it in now. So we have one which says, what we were talking about earlier, what are the downsides of having integrity that we have to be aware of? So are there any downsides with integrity that we have to be aware of?
Downsides to integrity.
I think this may have come out of when you were saying about with your story with the cinema, and like people are going to feel like I'm judging them, that sort of thing. Yeah, is there anything, or even what you said earlier?
You might stand out. You might stick out. Yeah, as Ian said, you might be,
I think you're going to pay a price.
You might pay a price. Yeah.
To be a real person of integrity, it's only a matter of time till you're going to pay a price for that.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to you're going to have people that will be offended at you because of your integrity. I mean, look at Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, were people offended at him because of his integrity? I mean, he called out the Pharisees. They weren't happy with him. They tried to kill him a few times.
Yeah.
Right? So, I think there's a downside in the sense that you have to be willing to pay a price for it, which is one of the reasons why people don't want to, why they slide into, consensual integrity, because I can kind of be in the pack here and settle for for a lesser integrity, and I'm not going to stand out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be the downside. You're gonna pay for it.
And maybe for a time your reputation, because if people are offended by your integrity, then they might not be truthful in, and then it's going to tarnish your reputation to others. And like, can I withstand that until almost my actions prove my reputation different to what's been said, maybe? And
Sure. I mean, look at Jesus. What was his reputation? What did people say about him?
Well, that he hung around with sinners.
He hung around with sinners.
Yeah.
He was a drunkard,
yeah.
right? So I mean, he was a wine bibber, or he was a drunkard. He hung around with sinners, so he was tarnished. How about Paul? What did they say about him? What do people say about Paul, even in our generation? What do people say about Paul? What's one of his criticisms? Anybody know? You know
Well, that he's some of the things he said, he's down on women, and there's other things that.
Yeah, he's a woman hater. I mean, we're still criticizing Paul, and he's been dead for over 2,000 years, right?
we had Carla who commented and said she lost her job because she wouldn't compromise integrity. So there are
Cost her, yeah.
Yeah, it's cost. We had a question, how can you discern if someone has integrity or not?
Well, I'll throw one thought in here. I think this is where we need the Holy Spirit to help us as believers. I think, you need to follow that intuition, that sense of the Holy Spirit. I think all of us have had moments where we look at someone and we think they look good, but there's just something nagging in my soul that says there's not something right. It's kind of, you said that earlier, Dave, about, different situations. And I think we have to rely on the Holy Spirit. I think looks can be deceiving, right? We can think that things are good. And if you look at Joshua, I mean, Joshua got deceived, in the Old Testament story with the Gibeonites because he didn't consult God. He didn't bother. I think we need the Lord's help to see what's integrity with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes, I think integrity is proven over time too.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes we get in trouble when the first impression isn't always the right one.
That's a good point.
Right? And I think even, is it scriptural that talks about not being quick to lay on hands, or is that just a good principle that I've been...
No, that's biblical.
It's a biblical principle, because I think, even when we've even had this discussion about elders in our church, and what age should somebody be an elder? Is there an age requirement? And, the word elder almost implies older. And we've had this discussion that there is something about having an elder should be above reproach. Well, if you've got 15, 20 years of faithfully walking with the Lord, and your family can say that, and you're like, there's this evidence, and I think sometimes we get in trouble because maybe we're wowed by charisma and all these other things. Yeah. And we don't realize we haven't really taken the time to really look at somebody's life.
Yeah, I think it takes time. I think it's good, Joel. I think there is a time factor that you just have to observe that person's life for a period of time.
Yeah, I have 2 more questions. So, what would you say to people who suggest that you're going to turn others off Christianity if you stand up for integrity?
Well, I'll throw a thought in there. I think that it's all in the posture of how we present ourselves. Mm-hmm. I can stand up in integrity, and I'm standing in integrity, and and I can divide a line and put that person down who's maybe not a believer. But if I stand for my principles, but there's a graciousness and a humility about how I do it, I might still offend them. Yeah. It's always the issue of, if people are going to be offended, let them be offended by what I stand for, not necessarily what I say or how I say it, right? My demeanor. I think it's all in our posture. Mm-hmm. Be people of integrity, but that doesn't mean we have to be bullies or, beat people over with it, right?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Final question. Do you guys have areas in your life that you battle to have integrity in? And if so, what do you do to try and catch it and keep it in check?
Now, be honest now, you guys.
Ian?
That's awesome.
I remember reading an article one time, and there was this woman in the UK, actually, and she was in her 80s, and she'd been a prominent leader for many, many years, and had lived had a just an amazing leader. And so they asked this woman. It was actually it was a TV interview, and they asked her. They said, you've been a leader many, many years. What's the hardest thing that you've found about being a leader? She said, being honest, which shocked everybody, because here you have this woman who's an elderly woman, has real stature, and has really lived an exemplary life. And yet her immediate answer, the hardest thing in her life to do with leadership was being honest. And I would say I could totally agree with that. Being honest is hard.
Yeah.
And so I would say many times you're faced with the temptation to compromise or just exaggerate something that's better, making it better than what it really is.
True.
Or so many different ways in which you can be less than honest.
Yeah.
And so I find that to be a real challenge, honestly. I mean, it's something that you have to wrestle with, every day almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking you touched on it, but the word exaggerate, like it's so I don't know why this is. It was like if I shot 83 in a game of golf and you asked me what I shot, I might say it was around 82. I know it was 82 or 83, but it's how many people would go to your church? Well, yeah, it's so easy to add another 50 to it. Or 20. How many people were at that crusade?
Just me.
Yeah, evangelistically, we say it, right? But it's those sorts of things. And I've looked at that in my own life and said, why am I always wanting to just make it a little better than it was?
Yeah.
And it's something I'm always fighting against.
And I think that it also goes to heart attitude, because God knows our hearts. He knows our real motive, our real attitude toward people. And so, where I mean, among different things, one of the areas that I struggle at times is when I realize that my heart, I might be saying to that person, I might be showing them that I'm okay with them, I'm good, but in my heart, in my attitude, there is an impatience, a criticalness, and I know it, right? And I might be able to show everyone else that I'm fine, but I'm not, and God knows my heart. And so there's often where I'm cut, like he says, you look good, you seem to be okay, but I know what your heart is. And that's challenging, because I can feel him looking at me saying, you need to deal with this, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing. And then, of course, out of our hearts as leaders is where the life flows or doesn't flow. So I think integrity of heart, we have to keep that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time, so maybe we should, you want to have any last words, Joel, for us on this?
I don't, maybe we should ask our guest if he has any last...
Any last words, Ian?
Final thoughts.
I just applaud you for dealing with this topic. I mean, I'm blessed, and I've learned personally from being with you, and I think you're hitting the right topic, because if we don't have integrity as believers or as leaders, we really don't have anything. It really is it really is the foundation. So I don't know what else I could add except to say kudos for the discussion and thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that I got lots more here that we want to talk about in terms of integrity. There's some other issues, some other scriptures we want to look at, and we just kind of ran out of time. So next week we're going to come back to this topic and pick it up where we left off, and look at a few stories in scripture that'll be really interesting, and so I think we'll have another great discussion next week.
It's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ian, for joining us. We're so grateful to have you with us and your wisdom and your video this week. I think even what you were saying in terms of what we're touching on, it's funny that we've done this for 3 weeks, and every week there's been something that's going wrong right before or during, and I do think that a big shout out to Dave and Andrew behind the scenes who fix it for us, but I think there's a reason for that, is my thinking, that we're hitting the right things, and there's something that wants to stop it getting out. So all these virtues in this season period we're in particularly, I think, are some definitely forgotten virtues that even having these teachings is making us realize, oh, that's something I need to look at or deal with.
True.
So
Right.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your questions and your comments. We so appreciate them, and we hope that you'll stay tuned for part 2 next week. So we will see you next Wednesday.